Welcome to Thursday's edition of COVID-19. Korea's daily tally stands on the 600 level amid cluster infections within confined, crowded and poorly ventilated spaces. Meanwhile, the resurgence in India and inflation concerns in the US are fueling much uncertainty for the global economy. We start now with the pandemic updates with our Kwon So-ah. So let's start here on the local front then.
Yes, Sunny, not a big change from the figure we saw on Wednesday, which was Buddha's birthday. 646 cases were reported as of 12 a.m. this Thursday, and that includes 619 infections here in the country and also 27 that were categorized as imported cases. Now, a dozen of those are reportedly from India. Now, while we are seeing a slight decline here, this is not a significant drop, especially because we had a public holiday on Wednesday, and that usually means fewer test numbers. So we should have seen an even further plunge there. So we still have to monitor the rest of the week to see what the trend is. Now, the proportion of new cases in the capital region has surpassed 70%, with the capital Seoul reporting over 200 infections for the second straight day, followed by 187 in Gyeonggi-do province. Here, a new cluster infection linked to a church, and in Seoul, new cases linked to a singing room as well as an indoor sports facility. Meanwhile, here, Gyeongsangbuk-do province is also a recent hotspot, with cases there traced to a Ramadan event, among other cases. And the total number here in Korea now stands at 134,117. And taking a look at the vaccination figures, although it was a public holiday on Wednesday, we've got more than 92,600 people who received their second dose of vaccination. Meanwhile, authorities here in Korea are reviewing studies abroad that are suggesting inoculating people with different products of vaccines is safe, including a latest research from Spain with preliminary results showing that giving people an AstraZeneca shot and a Pfizer shot can even be more effective than two AstraZeneca shots. On to other news on the vaccine front. The United Nations is concerned over Africa, saying that vaccine supply is the biggest challenge the continent is facing today. Here's more by UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
Limited supply and access to vaccines and insufficient support for the pandemic response are now hampering and delaying the recovery. Out of 1.4 billion doses administered around the world today, only 24 million have reached Africa, less than 2%.
Right, and in sharp contrast, so Europe has a higher vaccination rate, and it's looking to further ease its borders restrictions, that is, to foreign tourists.
Exactly, Sunny. The EU members decided on Wednesday to ease travel restrictions for non-EU members who are fully vaccinated, likely before the summer holiday begins. A list of countries subject to the ease is expected to be released as early as this week and may include the US and the UK. Let's take a look at the global figures now. The US has been reporting the lowest number of cases as well as fatalities in recent days, almost in a year. And here we are seeing some 27,000 new infections in the past 24 hours, but 10 times that amount in India, although that is also a decline from recent infections. Meanwhile, France and Germany are still some European countries that are dealing with resurgences, with Germany having just surpassed the number of Spain. And the total number of cases around the world stands at 165.5 million. Those are the updates I have for now. I'll be back in a bit after the government briefing. Sunny?
All right, so thank you for now. The current social distancing guidelines here in the country are poised to end this coming Sunday. And accordingly, tomorrow, that would be Friday, authorities will share their prevention measures for the weeks ahead. I have Kim Jae-hee here in the studio with details on that. Welcome, Jae.
Good afternoon, Sunny.
Right, so what are the chances, Jae, of an ease in restrictions?
Well, Sunny, that's what many are hoping for. But with the COVID-19 daily tally in the nation showing no signs of improvements, pundits in the nation are expecting the current distancing measures to remain in place for now. The new guidelines, set to be announced on Friday, will be in place for the next 3 weeks starting next Monday. Currently, the Greater Seoul area is at level 2 and most of other parts of the country at level 1.5. Health authorities remain on high alert, having inspected major tourist attractions and almost 230 temples in Seoul on Buddha's birthday on Wednesday to ensure that prevention rules were being followed. Health authorities are also warning of a possible rise in the daily tallies due to increased outdoor activity amid the warming weather and the use of air conditioners in poorly ventilated spaces. And with summer fast approaching, the Oceans Ministry will also inspect beaches nationwide prior to their openings starting this Saturday.
Right, moving on then, Jay, what is the latest on the vaccination front?
Well, South Korea's vaccination program is expected to pick up pace as 438,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccines arrived in the country early on Wednesday. Officials say as the vaccines are arriving on schedule, they're expecting no difficulties in reaching its first half target.
백신 도입은 계획대로
The vaccines are continuing to arrive on schedule. We anticipate that there will be no obstacles to our plan in securing vaccines for 13 million people, which include the elderly, by the end of June.
The first doses of the Pfizer vaccine for those aged 75 and older will resume on Saturday, and the first shots of the AstraZeneca vaccines will be handed out once again starting next Thursday. So far, around 7.3% of the country's population have gotten their first dose, and some 2.5% have been fully vaccinated. As for vaccination registration for seniors aged 60 to 74, more than half have made their bookings. Authorities would like to see these figures climbing higher and are urging more senior citizens to apply.
Getting a vaccine is the best and most certain way to protect yourself from COVID-19.
Right, of course. Now, Jay, I hear a Korean worker at the U.S. Forces Korea tested positive for COVID-19 recently.
That's right. U.S. Forces Korea said on Wednesday that a South Korean employee at the U.S. military base in Yongsan, central Seoul, has been confirmed of COVID-19. Now, the latest case raises the total number of infections reported by the USFK to 866. More than 3/4 of USFK personnel have received their vaccines so far. Vaccinations for the children of USFK service members have also kicked off, and a photo of the first teenager to receive the Pfizer shot was posted up on USFK's Facebook page.
I see. And lastly, I believe vaccines will top the agenda during talks between President Moon Jae-in and his U.S. counterpart, Joe Biden, on Friday, is it, in Washington, D.C.?
That's right. South Korea-U.S. summit will be held on Friday afternoon, Eastern Time. Now, President Moon, prior to his visit, vowed that he will boost vaccine cooperation through this summit and transform Korea into a global production hub of vaccines.
이번 방미를 백신 협력을 강화하고 백신 생산의 글로벌 허브로 나아가는 계기로 삼겠습니다.
White House Asia Policy Chief Kurt Campbell said the two leaders will discuss U.S. support for South Korea in the fight against the pandemic and how the two can collaborate to help others. Experts say a vaccine swap deal may also be discussed, where Seoul would receive vaccines on loan from Washington and give them back the same amount at a later date. A technology transfer agreement may also be on the table, where South Korea would manufacture vaccines locally using U.S. technology.
All right, Jay, as always, thank you very much for the coverage.
Thank you for having me.
Right, it's time now for the regular briefing on the COVID-19 situation here in Korea for this Thursday. Now, venues including gyms, singing rooms and restaurants, small restaurants that would be, have been raising the risk of infection in recent days given their closed, congested settings and lack of proper ventilation. Accordingly, authorities are urging for strict adherence to prevention efforts at these indoor venues. Now, we are still waiting for the briefing to start, so let's take another look, that is, at the possible side effects that may be felt after COVID-19 vaccination. Now, common side effects include pain at the site of injection and fatigue, as well as headaches. I hear the briefing is about to start. We'll come back to you afterwards.
방대본 역학조사 분석단장입니다.
I am
5월
Isan
20일
Won,
코로나19
and let us now
감염병
begin our regular
정례
briefing
브리핑
for May
시작하겠습니다.
20th, Thursday.
먼저 예방접종
First of all,
관련
as for the
주요 상황
COVID-19 vaccination, here
설명드리겠습니다.
are some major updates.
오늘 60세에서
Today, we are receiving the booking for the COVID-19 vaccine reservations for the senior citizens, and this has hovered around 50% now. And as for those between the age of 60 and 74, we will be rolling out the vaccines starting from May, and we have completed the booking for May. And also, we believe that the booking for first week of June is also to be finalized this week as well. And the earlier you book, you can select the date of a vaccination. And we are also providing the reservation via online, which you can have access to 24/7. And also, you can also do so at the hospitals that you frequently visit, as well as designated COVID-19 vaccination hospitals. And we need to also highlight that vaccination is the most certain way to protect yourself and the society. And currently, global research on the COVID-19 vaccination show that people who have been vaccinated, we have higher chances of preventing the COVID-19 infections and the spread. And we also have a few cases of these side effects. And we believe that there is a very low proportion or possibility of the virus spreading through those who have been fully vaccinated. So we believe that vaccination is very crucial, and we ask you to also comply to these quarantine measures, including the vaccination rollout as well. And next, as for the supply of vaccines to South Korea, here are some updates as well. On the 19th, we have the Pfizer vaccines. Some 438,000 have arrived in Korea. And 21st, on Friday, through COVAX, we also have in schedule for the Pfizer vaccines exactly 297,000 doses to arrive in Korea as well. And with this, we have in schedule out of the 18 million to arrive in Korea. Throughout this week, we will also have a significant amount of them being arriving here in Korea this week as well. And we also have in schedule more of the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines to arrive in the country going forward. And this evening, we will also have a discussion session for the side effects of the COVID-19 rollouts, vaccination rollouts, and we will be cooperating with the experts. And as for the compensation measures, we will be discussing more details so that we can disclose the details in a transparent manner to the public. And we will also look at the processes of the screening for these compensation, and this information will be also provided to the public as soon as possible. And at this discussion session, experts will discuss the possible side effects of the COVID-19 vaccination, and also the screening of the adverse responses and the correlation of these adverse responses to the vaccination. And they are carried out closed doors. However, you could have access real time through the YouTube channel of the KDCA. And as for the COVID-19 situations globally, we also have some updates. On a global level, for the second straight week, we have seen a slight decline in the number of total tally. However, we are seeing a slight increases of the COVID-19 in Asia. And India, in particular, we have seen a slight decline in the number of new infections, that is. However, in Vietnam and Taiwan, we are seeing a significant increase of new cases. And as for countries, major countries that already rolled out the vaccination ahead of us, we are seeing a clear decline of the COVID-19 infections. As for Israel, US, Germany, and France, which have high vaccination rate, we have seen a decline in the rate of the new cases. However, on the other hand, as for Japan, which has a relatively low vaccination rate, they are also still struggling with high resurgence of the virus. So once again, we would like to highlight the importance of vaccination vaccination, especially in terms of protecting yourself and your loved ones from the virus, and also preventing the spread of the virus locally as well. So we want to once again highlight that the senior citizens can complete the booking process for the COVID-19 vaccines either through online or offline through the COVID-19 hospitals, as well as the hospitals that they frequently visit. And once again, we would like to highlight that in foreign countries which have high vaccination rate, they have a very clear and significant drop in the number of daily cases. In Korea, we are having a relatively lower number of daily cases. However, it is very important that we also increase the rate of vaccination rate. We need to once again highlight that vaccination can help protect the senior citizens from the COVID-19 virus, and it can also help us to protect the lives of our loved ones and enable us to walk towards and to make a safe and healthy society. And until the day we have developed herd immunity, it is very important that we have a continued practice of face mask wearing and ventilation on a regular basis, as well as social distancing measures. So we once again ask for your participation going forward. And the COVID-19 quarantine officials, in particular, we will also devise detailed plans, and we will also make sure that the COVID-19 vaccine rollout carries out as scheduled. Thank you very much.
기자님들 질문에 답변 드리는 시간 갖겠습니다. 백신 접종과 관련돼서 질문 3가지 보내주세요.
Right, there was Lee Sang-won with Thursday's afternoon briefing. So what did he have to say?
The gist at today's meeting seems to be vaccination and cooperation on the vaccination front, with E mentioning that the pre-registration for people aged 65 and above has now surpassed 50%. And also the vaccination booking for people aged 60 to 74 will be underway until June 3rd. Also asking for people to help senior citizens with that process. And he did also mention that supply is continuing, with more doses expected to arrive soon, and those will arrive step by step on a weekly basis when it comes to Pfizer vaccines, for instance. And again, there are many risk factors remaining, such as variants, although there are also some positive developments, such as a decline in India, as he was also mentioning some of the global updates.
Right, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Also in related news, limitations on gatherings and restaurant operations amid the pandemic are fueling the popularity of food delivery services. And this in turn has been driving demand for delivery service workers, which are being filled by people with day jobs looking to boost their income with part-time work. Take a look.
Kim Sung-chan is a music artist who also works part-time at a neighborhood cafe. He also started a brand new job in February as a food delivery worker. He typically works 2 hours a day during the week and 6 hours on weekends, making as many as 10 deliveries a day.
원래 가수를 업으로 하고 있는데 코로나 때문에 지금 모든 공연이 중단돼서 배달 일을 시작하게 됐습니다. 배달 알바 가장 좋은 점은 시간 구애 안 받는 거. 제가 30분 시간만 있어도 한 건이라도 하고 올 수 있으니까 좀 시간을 잘 효율적으로 쓸 수 있는 것 같아서 그게 제일 장점인 것 같습니다.
Kim says the new job has given him an important source of income and that he's doing much better financially as a result.
한 달에 한 120만 원 정도 수익이 나고 있습니다. 기름값이랑 차량 소모품 이런 거 빼면 사실 100만 원 정도? 주변에 진짜 많아요. 제가 이제 픽업 가도 배달 기사분들 정말 많이 오는데 연령층도 정말 다양하시고 성별도 다양하고 요즘에 좀 많이 인기인 것 같고 제 주변 친구들도 하는 친구들 되게 많아요.
The delivery service industry had already been growing for years now, but has since taken off following the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2020, the total amount of food deliveries ordered online and through mobile apps jumped by more than 40% compared to a year earlier. With the surge, the industry needed a large army of part-time delivery workers, with college students, office workers, and even homemakers eagerly stepping in to fill the gap.
프리랜스 이코노미를 기그 이코노미라고도 하는데 기그라고 하는 거는 필요할 때 썼다가 필요 없으면 이렇게 자르는 그런 시스템인데요. 코로나 때문에 급증이 돼서 지금 전체 세계업체 배달원, 등록 배달원의 합이 10만 명 이상이 15만 명까지 된다고 보고요.
Contactless delivery, where the food is simply left at the customer's doorsteps, has allowed workers to make their delivery runs with a sense of safety in mind. Flexible work hours, which fit seamlessly into the schedule of their day jobs, has also been a major factor in the popularity of part-time delivery gigs.
코로나 때문에 많은 사람들이 일자리를 잃거나 아니면 경제적인 소득이 크게 줄어들게 되면서 그러면서 이제 부업이나 아니면 새로운 일자리를 찾는 사람들한테 손쉽게 참여할 수 있는 그런 이제 플랫폼 노동이 내지는 플랫폼 일감으로 참여할 수 있는 게 배달 서비스가 되겠죠. 플랫폼이라는 그 기술 공간이 이 배달 분야에 부쩍 많은 사람들이 참여하고 종사하게끔 만든다고 볼 수가 있겠죠.
However, several issues still remain, especially when it comes to the lack of compensation in case of accidents and injuries while on the job. Therefore, experts are calling on the need for a new safety net and a protection scheme for part-time delivery workers.
이런 기그 노동자, 한국어로 특수 형태 근로 노동 종사자가 그 사고가 났을 경우에 보상할 수 있는 시스템이 마땅치 않습니다. 그래서 지금 이제 10만 명 이상의 고용을 만드는 산업으로 지금 기그 배달 경제가 성장하고 있는 만큼 거기에 걸맞는 새로운 어떤 위험 보상 시스템, 위험 관리를 할 수 있는 여러 가지 사회적인 제도나 이런 시스템의 도입이 절실히 필요한 지금 시점입니다.
The growing number of delivery and other gig workers may be reflecting permanent changes in our concept of labor amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
올해 우리 경제가 11년 만에 4% 이상의 성장률을 달성할 수 있도록 정부 역량을 총동원하고 민간의 활력을 높이겠습니다.
최근에 글로벌 인플레 우려와 외국인 자금의 흐름 변동 등 대외 리스크의 요인들이 들고져 나오지 않도록 철저하게 관리하는 것도 국내의 빠른 경기 회복들을 뒷받침하는 데 꼭 필요하다고 하겠습니다.
While hopes remain high for vaccination efforts to put the global economy back on track, variables including the resurgence in India are threatening such hopes for recovery. For more on this, I have Professor Yang Hee-dong from Ewha Women's University. Welcome back, Professor Yang.
Thank you for inviting me.
And joining this session virtually is Abdul Abiyad at the Asian Development Bank over in the Philippines. It's a pleasure to have you with us, Mr. Abiyad.
Happy to join you. Thank you.
Right then, Professor Yang, Korea's economy is forecast to expand well above 3% this year. Are we looking to return to pre-pandemic levels?
I hope so. And there are many international and domestic economic institutions predicted that our economy will get back before the status of before the COVID-19 at the end of this year. For example, the IMF predicted that our economy will grow about 3.6%, and OECD also predicted that we will have a very close to 4%. And even some domestic institutions are even more conservative because they had lower the growth rate, such as low threes. So, and besides, the export is doing a very good job for the past 6 months. We'll get back to those numbers of export pretty soon. So for many reasons, and also the world economy is coming back as well. So IMF and OECD also predicted that the world economy will grow about 6% this year. And the major reason is all those advanced countries, as the US and UK, all the Western European countries are doing a very good job, such as very strict government control, such as lockdown. And all these governments have done a very good job with very luxurious and generous fiscal policies. So for many reasons, I mean, these advanced countries had technical leadership for the economic growth. But the major problem lies in the recent surgence of the COVID-19 occurrences in Southeast and Southern Asia. So many people used to argue that 60% of recent the infections occur in Asian countries. So that is major, I think, the hinge point whether all those positive predictions will be realized at the end of this year.
Right, and we'll get into that later on, of course.
Yeah.
But first then, Mr. Abiad, the Asian Development Bank also recently raised its growth outlook for the Korean economy to 3.5%, I believe. What was the reason for this upward revision?
Yeah, that's right. We did upgrade our forecast last month to 3.5%. And actually, since then, as Professor Yang mentioned, many forecasters have been upgrading further. The latest consensus forecast for Korea is close to 4%. And as Professor Yang mentioned, the reason for this is the strong recovery in the global economy. Last month, we saw Korean exports up substantially. And, it's really driven by recovery in the big markets. If you think about China and the US, both are growing very strongly. So China accounts for about a quarter of Korea's exports, and it's expected to grow about more than 8% this year. The US is the second largest export market for Korea, accounting for about 14% of Korea's exports, and the US is expected to grow about 6.5%. This global recovery is good for everybody, but it's particularly good for Korea also because demand for the goods, the types of goods that Korea produces, semiconductors, wireless devices, computers, is strong right now. So it's that's really the reason for the rosy forecast from us and from many others.
Right, and staying with that, Mr. Abiad, your bank has also claimed that growth is gaining momentum across developing Asia, with the region expected to grow 7.3% this year. Now, how does the current COVID-19 situation in India, that is, look to affect this expectation by your bank?
That's right. So we do. So 7.3% is our forecast. That's up from the contraction. The first time developing Asia has contracted in 6 decades. So 0.2% contraction last year, 7.3% growth this year, and so really driving that are the two largest economies. As I mentioned, we expect China to grow by more than 8% this year, and India. We had forecast our forecast for India last month was for 11% growth this fiscal year. And there are 3 reasons to expect India to grow strongly this year. One is just base effects. You're comparing, growth will be measured against a very weak 2020. The second is that containment measures so far in response to this latest outbreak have been more targeted and localized as opposed to the large-scale lockdowns which were used last year and for prolonged periods, and which led to a substantial contraction in the Indian economy last year. And the third is that there's been good progress on vaccinations. A rapid pace that looked like India was set to reach its target dates for widespread vaccination. Over the past month, however, India's outbreak has worsened substantially. So a lot of this happened after our forecast came out, but the outbreak has worsened substantially, as you showed earlier in the show. Close to 400,000 cases a day. Restrictions are becoming even more stringent, and so you're seeing mobility outside the home decline to about 45%, and also worryingly progress on vaccination in India is slowing. So we will almost surely be revising our forecasts in our July update. So that definitely is one of our worries.
Right, and staying in India, Professor Yang, I understand we have some 700 Korean firms in India. What businesses are they involved in, and which sectors here in the country look to bear the brunt of a dramatic COVID-19 fallout in India?
Well, the COVID-19 situation in India is very ironic because the vaccination rate is even higher than in Korea. So you know that the vaccination is completed through the 2 rounds of injections. And for the primary injections, India has about 10%, and for the second round, they have about 5 or 6. But both numbers are higher than in Korea. So there are major problems like in the weak social infrastructure, such as medication services, like hospitals, etc. But those issues cannot be resolved very quickly. So in other words, it may take pretty long, more than our expectation that India will get back from the disaster of COVID-19 problems. Well, India, we should remember that India is ranked about 5th or 6th in the world economy in terms of the GDP size. So if India is suffering from this COVID-19, it may absolutely make some dampening impact on the overall economy. And besides, there are many countries, there are many big-sized conglomerates have moved their manufacturing facilities to India due to lower their labor costs. And a lot of factories in China and other countries have moved to India as well. And besides, a lot of Indians are very fluent in English communication. So there are many positive aspects why the big-sized conglomerates decided to move their factories to India. Same for Korean manufacturers. We have Samsung Electronics and Hyundai Motors, LG, POSCO. All those big conglomerates have moved to India to lower the labor costs. And also, we include those intermediate manufacturing the activities into the statistics of export. So even though India has recorded about 2.2 or 2.5 out of our overall export numbers, but their impact is far bigger than the numbers, right, as we catch up. Besides, we have huge intermediate manufacturing facilities in there. If those facilities are broke down, I mean, we should find out alternative places or factories or cities where we can manufacture all those fished products from the raw materials that they will import from China and many other countries. So that is a big concern for us.
Right. And keeping in mind what Professor Yang has just said, Mr. Abiyad, what would be the far-reaching global economic implications of a prolonged COVID-19 crisis in India?
Yeah, thanks. So Professor Yang did mention one of those channels. Basically, one can think of it through your conventional economic channels. And so there, so as Professor Yang mentioned, India is the 6th largest economy in the world. It's nowhere near as large as China or the US. And so if you think of it as an export market, India accounts for less than 3% of Korea's exports, roughly the same share in world export as a market for world exports. So in that particular channel, if India's economy grows more slowly than forecast because of the resurgence, that'll have some effect, but it'll be pretty small. The other channels that Professor Yang mentioned, right? If you have operations in India, then you will be affected because the domestic economy will be affected. Our bigger concern is actually through two non-conventional, or not your traditional economic channels, but through two COVID-19 related channels. The first is that with this rise in COVID infections, the risk of more infectious and deadly variants emerging and spreading, including beyond India's borders, rises, obviously. And the second is that India has a disproportionate role in pharma and medical supplies in general, and in vaccine production in particular. So India supplies roughly 20% of the world's generic drugs. It's also the 2nd largest manufacturer of protective personal equipment. The country also produces 70% of the world's vaccines. So for COVID-19 vaccines in particular, India is the provider of 86% of the supplies to COVAX. And so, as we know, there are already shortages in vaccine supply. And if this outbreak continues, these are two important channels through which India's outbreak may affect the regional and global recovery.
Right, so the repercussions of a fallout there look to be very extensive. Professor Yang, how does that situation in India then look to threaten Korea's exports?
Well, as I already said, there are many occasions, there are many risks involved with the current resurgence of COVID-19 in India. What is positive aspect in India, though, is the peak numbers of the new the infection cases was in April 30th, when there were 400,000 new cases in India. But now the numbers of new cases is on the decrease, though. Well, the problem is death toll. Death toll is amount to the peak these days. As I already said, there are many impacts from this resurgence of COVID-19 in India. The first one is, as already the professional said, India is taking up a very critical role in providing the vaccines, right, to the global distribution. And a lot of the manufacturing facilities are locked down until October. So that is the big impact, the very short-term impact from this the disaster. And second one is already said. India has taken a very critical role in global supply chains, and a lot of factories are being locked down. And for example, the Hyundai Motors, their sales in India has been decreased about more than 8%, and Kia Motors has been decreased more than 50% last month. And Samsung Electronics, their market share is second after Xiaomi in Indian market for the mobile. And the India is taking up about 10% of overall Samsung Electronics manufacturing facilities for mobile devices. So there are many reasons why we cannot look down on the significance on the reason, the problems in the Indian case. But we cannot lose our hope in India because a lot of the global companies, including Korean companies, will look for the alternative places to move the factories. And the Korean President Moon Jae-in is visiting the U.S. and we'll have the summit meeting with the president on May 21st. And if I remember, the major agenda is to look for, the asking or the Moderna to create another manufacturing facilities in Korea. So I think this is, I don't know whether this is a very personal subjective opinion, but I think it's the right time for Korean by industries, right, to move the manufacturing facilities in this territory and explore new opportunities to rank up their positions in the postures in the world as one of very great hub for the manufacturing of bio medicines.
Right. Meanwhile, Mr. Abiyad, inflation risks over in the U.S. appear to be adding another layer of uncertainty to hopes for global economic stability. What are your thoughts on this?
Yes, that's definitely the case. A lot of talk about inflation in the U.S. right now. And let's just talk about the reasons for that. One is that, as mentioned earlier, the U.S. is expected to grow by 6.5%. Typically, the U.S. grows 2.5%, 3%. And so 6.5 is, well, one, obviously it's because the U.S. contracted by substantially last year, but a lot of it is because of stimulus. Very large stimulus package put in place by the U.S. government, a lot of it falling in this fiscal year. So, and what economists call the output gap, how low we were relative to the U.S. Potential output it's not that large. So part of it is a concern that the U.S. may overheat. One notable thing is that it's still the case that employment, that there's still there's still some slack. So that's one. But also this stimulus is temporary. So even if there are inflationary pressures as a result of stimulus, once that stimulus fades, those inflationary pressures will also subside. There are another cause of inflation is, again, on the good side, is supply shortages. What's happening is that you have rapid normalization in economic activity because of good progress on vaccination. And what's happening is that supply of certain things, whether it's semiconductors or shipping services or things like that, are not keeping up, and therefore you're seeing prices rise. But even that is also a transitory phenomenon. And once those things catch up, we expect those inflationary pressures to subside. And really, just to emphasize, this is a U.S. problem. If you look at, let's here in the region, for example, we're not worried about inflation at all. We expect inflation to be below 3% for developing Asia as a whole.
I see. And Professor Yang, staying with that, what are your expectations about the implications for the Korean economy if inflation fears in the U.S. become a reality?
Well, last month in April, the U.S. has realized very surprising records of consumer price index, which is 4.2% the increase. This was the highest increase of consumer price index after 2008, September, I remember. So many people suspected that the FRB will increase the interest rate, or they may go for the tapering. That means buying back the national bonds. But those effects will may help lower the inflation rate, but the major negative impact from those, the tapering, the economic the policies, it may make it dampening impact on the employment rate. So last month, the employment rate was quite disappointing in U.S. because they predicted to have more than 1 million new jobs, even though the reality had only 26% of the original plan. So in other words, I think FRB and the U.S. government are well aware of the impact of tightening their fiscal policies or increasing interest rates because it may make the negative impact on the investment that also will lead to the reduction in the employment rate. So the U.S. government will never look down on the significance of the employment rate because they are aware of a dampening impact from COVID-19 on their overall economy, and they're trying to recovering from those disasters. As already mentioned, the U.S. expected to have more than 6% growth this year because they have the nightmare economic decrease in last year. So that's why it's kind of bouncing back impact because their the reference point of last year was a horrible growth rate. But they cannot, again, need to keep the balance between the tightening up the inflations and also the boosting up their economy through the employment. Well, what's the impact in Korean economy? If U.S. increases interest rate, lots of people are really concerned. A lot of international liquidity fund will move back to U.S. And that flow of liquidity make a very bad impact on our security markets and the foreign currency markets. So we wish, a lot of people wish that the U.S. government will not increase interest rate or go for the tightening, the tapering policies because it may aggravate the fiscal policies or the financial markets in Korea.
Professor Yang, a delegation of Korean corporate leaders is also in Washington, D.C. ahead of the summit that you mentioned between Presidents Moon and Biden. What are your thoughts on the presence of this delegation and matters to be addressed during Friday's summit meeting in Washington, D.C.?
Yes, as I already mentioned, I think this is, from my very personal subjective opinion, I think this is a very perfect timing for the Moon Jae-in to visit the U.S. I'm sorry if I frustrated with my the subjective opinion. Because India has been the major provider of the vaccination in the world, and India is in big trouble. So the American firms may look for the alternative manufacturing facilities, infrastructures in all of the world, and Korea may be one, because Korea still is second largest the manufacturing, the manufacturing hub in the world for the biomedical products. So Korea could be a greater successful alternative for the Indian manufacturing facilities. And besides, Korea still has a problem occurring of vaccines. So Korean government has been in pursuit the vaccines, the swapping contract with the U.S. government. That's what happened. In other words, there should be some, the trade-off between our requirements and the U.S. government's requirements as well. So in other words, if we can accept, to move the manufacturing facilities back to Korea, so that if you can make up for the expected loss of manufacturing facilities in the world, that could make a positive impact on the American, bio vaccination companies such as Moderna. But also, if we can acquire more inventories of the vaccines, that could also make a positive impact on the health conditions. I think there is a kind of win-win situation between U.S. and Korea.
Right. Meanwhile, Mr. Abiad, you mentioned shortages in supplies across the world amid the pandemic in recent months. How does that situation look to affect global economic activity in the months ahead?
Yes, it will be a challenge. We do work. One of the risks we flagged in our report was a delay in vaccination progress, which can really set back economic recovery. And as we saw, even in economies like Vietnam, where infection control was good, outbreaks can always occur until you get widespread vaccination, until you get herd immunity. In our Asian Development Outlook report last month, we estimated that the delay in vaccination progress would set back developing Asia's growth by about 1 percentage point relative to baseline forecasts. And this works through several channels. It can stifle normalization in economic activity because mobility will remain reduced, consumer confidence and consumer demand will be affected. Investment will also be affected via increased uncertainty. And third, delays in vaccine supply and vaccine progress can hold back the recovery in tourism. So many channels through which vaccination progress or the lack of progress in vaccination can affect economic recovery in our region.
Right. All right, Ms. Dabia, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts. And Professor Young, thank you very much for your insights today.
Thank you.
Right, containing COVID-19 would be one tangible path to global economic recovery. So do seek to abide by prevention measures. Thank you for watching.